Network. Note the new name. And I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, your host for the next hour. Tonight we are talking about something a little different. It's not quite politics, although it's now one of the major areas of discussion in the upcoming 2020 presidential race, and that is tonight's topic is based on a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago when the backlash against Obamacare first inspired Republicans to talk about, quote, repeal and replace. Since they're still talking, and since the Democrats are now also talking about health care alternatives, especially the federal takeover of all health care, the topic remains open for new ideas. I have approached this topic from the perspective of a clean sheet. Why try to build a new system on the bones of a failed system that no one likes? Why not instead build a new system on the foundation of goals which everyone accepts and agrees with? And this proposal is my answer to that question. But before I outline the new system, I'd like to point out that there are very few differences in the way the ordinary American will experience health care. Number one, instead of having their health insurance premiums deducted from their paychecks, the average American will be responsible for paying those premiums themselves. The easiest way to handle this would be through banks' auto pay. Second, the premiums will probably be cheaper than the current payments because of the competition for your business. Third, you will pay your insurance premiums through an organization of your choice, your credit union, church, town, neighborhood association, or a specialized medical insurance organization. Your medical insurance will not depend on your employer or your employment. Fourth, when medical bills do come due, they will be paid by your own insurance company, possibly using your medical savings account funds as well. And fifth and most important, the life and death medical decisions for your family will be made by you and not by the insurance company or the government. And that's it. That's the only differences. The starting point for a discussion of the national health care system should be setting our goals. I believe that the American health care should be, number one, of high quality and state of the art. Two, it should be available to everyone, universal coverage of some sort. Three, affordable. Four, abundant. And five, well-funded. So what are the principal obstacles to these goals? First is the shortage of medical personnel. This shortage has two facets. There are not enough professionals produced in the first place, and too many drop out before their time, mainly due to frustration. There are whole areas of inner cities and rural America, for example, that have no physicians at all. Why? Because our medical schools do not graduate enough doctors to serve the population of the United States. Why not? Lack of intelligent students? Lack of students who are motivated to give their lives in service to humanity? Not at all. The reason is lack of money. Medical education is so lengthy and so costly in this country that very few students can afford to go to medical school. And this situation has created a national crisis. One very good use of taxpayer funds would be to offer medical and nursing school students free tuition, open to all qualified students. We do it for the military, why not for doctors and nurses? The cost would be minuscule compared to the Department of Defense or Department of Agriculture's subsidies. This policy would have massive return on public investment. More doctors would increase coverage of the population. More doctors would increase competition for the patient dollar. More could devote themselves to research, new people, new ideas, new openness to change. The quality of care would go up and the cost would go down, a mantra we have been hearing a lot about lately. This program would also assure the continuing support for the U.S. medical technology, which is already the envy of the world. So how do we provide adequate funding? We can start with where does the $3.5 trillion we now spend on healthcare, where does it go? The money flow starts with the employers who pay the insurance companies out of profits. It then goes mainly to the vast bureaucracies of the insurance companies, which distribute the money, the government, which oversees the money, and the hospitals and practitioners last, who must respond to the companies and to the government. Only about 1/5 of the $3.5 trillion spent on healthcare gets to the practitioners. So how can we simplify this labyrinth? It is a drag on the efficiency of the economic system by vastly increasing the cost of starting and staying in a business, and it is also a drag on the healthcare system by removing individuals from the opportunity of seeing to their own health needs. A patient-centered system also reduces the role of federal and state governments, which account for 61% of health expenditures. The patient doesn't need the insurance company or the government. If both the government and the insurance company were completely eliminated from the system, nearly 2/3 of the cost of the American health care would be gone. Of course, there will always be some need for both, so assume that half of that cost would be taken care of, would be less. At today's rates, that would be $2+ trillion. There is still a place for insurance companies in this system, although dramatically reduced. The most obvious place is for catastrophic insurance, a safety net for when something very expensive happens to someone in the family, or the church, or the credit union, or whatever assembly of people the individual chooses to participate with. This brings us to the role of governments. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Hey, this is L.A. Batchelor reminding you to join us on the Donaldson Files with your hosts Tom Donaldson and Coco Constantly. Join them and listen to all the topics and discussions on Mondays on WCOMFM.org or on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at blogtalkradio.com/LA Batchelor. It is politics that you've never heard before on the Donaldson Files. And if you miss any part of their broadcast, you can listen to the podcast at our website, thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor Radio News Network. We're talking about the place of the government in a new concept or a new system of health care. And the first federal government act should be to lift all interstate commerce restrictions on insurance companies so that they are free and invited to offer policies in any and all of the states they wish to compete, without the necessity of creating a separate bureaucracy for every state they enter. The second federal reform should be the creation of a program for federal aid to qualified students in medical professions. My suggestion would be a free education in exchange for a period of service in underserved areas of practice, such as rural or inner city areas that are no doctor zones. A third federal reform would dramatically reduce the national health care costs in the form of health reform. Everyone makes mistakes, even including medical practitioners and hospitals. It is the federal government's role to protect both the treatment sector and the patient. But the current practice of unlimited liability has led to defensive medicine, That is, exhaustive tests and treatments used far beyond medical purposes. These extras are done to provide a defense against the inevitable lawsuit in case anything goes wrong. This uber caution has become a major cost driver in American medicine. Congress should set reasonable and realistic limits on the monies which can be given to the victims of everything from malfeasance to honest mistakes. No more windfalls for injury lawyers. The larger issue is universal coverage, care for the poor and other underserved members of our nation. The concept of universal care is a noble and worthy cause, but socialized medicine is not the only or even the best solution to achieve universal care. We have government programs to feed the hungry, to provide health care for the elderly, to protect the innocent. We can provide health care access to the poor and the underserved, whether because of poverty or location. And we can do a better job than the COBRA coverage for those who lose their jobs. It is very tempting to design a system in which no government plays a role, but the most efficient way to care for the poor would seem to be a state-run program which levies a small per capita fee on each pool of insured to be placed in a designated fund administered by the state for the benefit of qualified citizens. A model for such a program might be the Medicaid programs we have in each state now, or the uninsured driver programs administered by the states. We have now discussed the entire healthcare cycle without mentioning Medicare. There is a moral and legal mandate involved in Medicare which does not exist elsewhere. Medicare works reasonably well as a medical insurance system for those who contributed to it all their working lives. The most prudent and honorable way to approach Medicare would seem to be to leave it alone for those to whom commitments were made, even while moving slowly toward a system of patient-centered Medicare or health care for those just starting out, with free choices developed for those in the mid-career. The pressure of the free market system we have been describing will undoubtedly alter and reform Medicare as the new system matures in due course. So, here is a free market system, what a free market system might look like. It fulfills all our goals for an American system that is state-of-the-art, namely based on more medical personnel, available to all in need. The health insurance is not limited to employers. Affordable, because more competition will lower costs. Abundant, because there are no doctor zones left. They will be eliminated. And it is well financed because reduced involvement of the government and in the insurance companies would reduce approximately $2 trillion in costs. To get there, we need 1, increase the supply of medical practitioners, 2, create a patient-centered system by letting the patient spend his or her own money on health care, and 3, create state-sponsored safety nets for the poor and the underserved. These proposals, of course, may seem radical today, even in today's free market culture, but sometimes the most obvious solution is indeed the best. The fact that the employer-based system we have today was initiated because the elite of another day needed a quick way to exempt health care costs from federal taxes. No one thought this simple IRS rule would hamper businesses forever, so let's change it. And now I'd like to welcome to the Dr. Larry Show, Dr. Edward Creagan, who is a physician of long-standing grand repute and who is willing to join us from Rochester, Minnesota today. Dr. Ed, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Larry, and you you outline an eloquent treatise of a very complex problem. And I would refer our leaders and our listeners to your website, where this document is easily accessible. And this is dated August 11th, 2019. And this is entitled, What a Free Market Healthcare System Might Look Like. So for our listeners, this is an excellent summary of a bewilderingly complex situation. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the plug, and I'm sure you have. Well, first of all, can you tell our listeners briefly what your where you are working, and I know that you have a curriculum vitae that is longer than most books, but can you give us a short version?
Yes, I am a board-certified medical oncologist and an internist. I am the first Mayo Clinic physician board-certified in hospice medicine and palliative care, and I've had a long-standing interest in health expenses and how we can help patients and families get the best care possible. And with my hospice palliative medicine hat, I would just like to refer our listeners to a book, and this is called Farewell. And this book reflects about 40 narratives, 40,000 conversations with patients at the end of life. And this is a GPS of the soul. This is a biopsy of our health system to help patients and families find a better way in the darkest days of their lives. And your outline really capsulizes the complexity of the problem, Dr. Larry, and the hope that we can do better.
Well, that certainly sounds like an important document. What do you think of the specifics of the proposal that I just made?
Somebody once said that the devil is in the details.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think anyone can intelligently dissect a very thorough analysis. But I might weigh in on a number of perspectives. You know, certainly within the next several years, we will be short about 100,000 physicians. And medical schools cannot be built soon enough to make up for this shortfall. And our listeners need to understand that a pandemic affecting the soul of medicine today is the phenomenon of burnout.
Yeah.
And until that issue is somehow modified, physicians will be retiring early, and those patients will be kept adrift. Another important issue that you touched on is the expense of medical education. Depending upon the school, a debt load of a single medical student might be $200,000 for a medical school couple that could easily approach $350,000. And that's why some schools, and I believe NYU has been a leader in this, that the tuition has been waived so that medical students are more willing to go into primary care and internal medicine, which are practices which do not provide great remuneration. Another issue that needs to somehow be addressed is to make the electronic health record more user-friendly. There are tremendous advances in the digital management of illnesses, but right now the record is not optimum and is a factor in some individuals leaving the profession. So I would invite the listeners to get on your website because you have eloquently addressed a bewilderingly complicated problem.
Well, I'm certainly very concerned about. In fact, I'm also suggesting that we use. I don't believe in getting the government involved unnecessarily, but in this situation with the shortage of medical professionals, it just seems to me that it's incumbent upon the government to step up and provide for adequate a scholarship type of program with. And I'm thinking of something like what we have for the military. You know,
Yes.
They go and they get a college education basically paid for, and then they have to give 2 years of their lives into service in the military.
Yes.
And it seemed to me that other countries do things similar for every college graduate. For example, Germany, they have a 2-year kind of donated service program for all college graduates. It seemed to me that that's something that we could certainly afford in this country. It'd be a lot cheaper than socialized medicine, and it would get a lot closer to the real heart of the problem.
Sure. You know, from many of my colleagues who have trained overseas, in most countries there is a mandatory 2 or 3 year service commitment, typically in a rural area, as part of the payback for the cost of their education. So I think you've touched on some creative approaches to somehow decrease the brain drain from hospitals and clinics.
Well, it seems like if we had more physicians and more medical professionals, that would also have some impact on the burnout problem.
Yes, because patients are older, they're sicker, the technology is overwhelming. None of us can absorb the new changes. I have read data that in 1 week, 20,000 biomedical papers would be published online. And none of us can absorb this information. So if there are more practitioners, that decreases the pressures on the rank and file.
I think we have a question from our listener.
Yes.
Listener, are you with us?
Yes. Yeah, this is Tom Donaldson.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah. The question that I want to kind of ask this question of Dr. Ed.
Yes.
Is this. Do you see an expansion, let's say, of nurse practitioners or PAs, or maybe a kind of trying to squeeze in for an internal medicine or family practitioner the education? What I mean by that is because because a lot of basically for a doctor you're going to get 4 years of medical school, then you got 3 years plus a residency.
Yes.
And that's like 7 or 8 years. Like
right.
A nurse practitioner, you're looking at 2 or 3 years of medical school before they go in. So
yes.
So the question is, could one eliminate, let's say, a year off the education side for a general practitioner example, or maybe a year or 2 off the residency side, and still have a doctor prepared to be a doctor?
Yeah, and that's a superb idea, and it's clear that the nurse practitioner and the physician assistant typically come from very sophisticated programs. And for your fairly routine medical or even cancer problem, they are magnificent clinicians, and I would feel comfortable and proud to have them care for me or my family. They are conscientious, they know their limitations, and they do a superb job. And in fact, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I believe that there are freestanding clinics of nurse practitioners and physician extenders providing absolutely state-of-the-art management. Now, let me just backtrack for a minute. I obviously went to college, medical school, and my cancer training from start to finish took 4 years, at which time I was board eligible. Today, Those 4 years take almost 8 to 10 years. So there needs to be some different pathways for individuals who want to be researchers as opposed to those who want to be seeing patients like a Marcus Welby. So I do think that the so-called mid-levels, and in Minnesota we call them practice partners because they're in a partnership with us, do a superb job in providing conscientious care under very difficult circumstances. Superb question. Thank you.
Yeah, you can just do one follow-up, and then then I'll turn back to Dr. Larry. Do you ever see a day in which, let's say, physician assistants or nurse practitioners can practice on their own? But normally, most states will have them associated with a physician.
Yes.
Is that a possibility, or would that be a possibility?
That's very clearly a possibility. And the model now might be 6 or 8 nurse practitioners working under the supervision of a physician, but the hands-on, day-to-day management is on the hands of the nurse practitioners and the physician assistants. And the physician, although he's responsible or she's responsible, they are somewhat distant from the daily management of that patient. And in general, this works out very, very satisfactorily.
What about midwives?
I'm smiling here because I have a vague idea of what they do, Dr. Larry. I think in general they have superb training. They can act very independently, but I think they also are under the watchful guidance, albeit peripheral, of an obstetrician. And none of them are free agents, so to speak. They are remotely connected with that physician.
Is that still a viable profession in the United States, or is that kind of...
Oh, absolutely. Because most women, during the sensitive, sacred time of childbirth, are more comfortable with women practitioners than men. I think that's only
understandable.
Normal.
Yeah, that's understandable.
So I think that the role of the midwife has been well defined, and they provide a dimension of comfort and compassion that we men may not always understand.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor Pad and the Bachelor Radio Network, News Radio Network. I'm having trouble with the new name here. My tongue gets away from my mind. Anyway, you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show.
Join Barry Barnes for Locker Talk on the Bachelor Pad Network as he presents NFL news and evaluates players. Fridays at 9 a.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com.
Hello, this is Sandy Eason, the host of Sandy's Secrets. Come and join us, where we will be talking about women's issues of sexuality, sensuality, and self-love. We'll be coming soon, exclusively on the Bachelor Pad Radio Network.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network.com. And we're talking to Dr. Ed Creagan, who has been kind enough to join us tonight, and he brings a practical experience and perspective to the problem of the American healthcare system that I obviously do not have. And in fact, I am not a healthcare economist either, but I did see the need for somebody to enter the list, so to speak, on behalf of a healthcare program that does not depend on either the insurance companies or the government. And Dr. Ed has been very supportive of that. We obviously I hit a lot of different problems when I was trying to develop this idea, and one of the first ones that we talked about has to do with the shortage of medical personnel. Then there's also the issue of the insurance companies. One of my good friends is a dermatologist who, every time I see him, whether it's in his office or not, he knows I'm in the political arena, so to speak, and he starts giving me what for about how insurance companies are running medicine for their own good. And I think maybe he's a little bit overreactive, but generally speaking, I think there's a lot of sort of pent up concern about that. Have you run into that yourself?
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Larry. There's resentment towards insurance companies effectively treating patients. And let me give you an example. There was a beloved colleague of mine who was a superb physician, and his son developed autism. And there was a nationally approved program supported by peer-reviewed data that his son would be helped by this outpatient program, and the insurance companies refused to pay for it. The physician was able to pay out of pocket at a tremendous sacrifice, and this saved the life of his son. But if the dad did not have the resources, the life of his son would be profoundly compromised. And every one of our listeners has an example of a procedure being recommended, of a test, of an intervention, and the insurance company refused to pay for it, and the patient did not get the care that they deserved. So there's something fundamentally wrong when an amorphous, anonymous organization is dictating the care that we and our families deserve.
And it's true of any big bureaucracy, whether it's insurance companies or whether it's the government, because these are not people. The whole orientation of such a organization is not individualistic at all.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is that if we get out from under the shadow of first of all, one of the big cost factors for national healthcare companies, insurance companies, is that they have to have almost a separate office for every single state that they're in because of all the different requirements of the 50 states.
Yes.
And then so that's a cost factor for them, but they also don't compete where they either don't want to fulfill the specific requirements of that particular state, and that's very true, I think, in places like the Dakotas and some of the southern states where the clientele are not expected to be very well off anyway.
Yeah.
So therefore we have areas where there really isn't any available insurance coverage, and let alone bad insurance coverage. There isn't any at all. And then, so I'm suggesting we get the employers out of the way. For one thing, if you're starting a new company, and with the standard expectation of employees today, they expect you to cover at least a part of their health insurance, so that the capital cost of starting a new company is increased sometimes 2 or 3 times.
Yes.
And then on top of that, you had the Obamacare thing where they had limited the number of hours that an employee could have without if before you if you exceeded that, you had to give them health insurance. So
Yes.
let's just get the employers out of the way. They don't want to do it anyway. And if we could have many more free association type of groups that would be in the market for insurance, we would have tremendous explosion of competitive insurance products.
And I think it also puts the burden on us patients as consumers to be a little more street smart and savvy about the cost of health care. One of our prominent leaders here in Minnesota made the comment that until you are sick, you have no concept, you have no insight into how good or how poor your health coverage is.
And that's undoubtedly true. I've been very fortunate myself and my family, and not to have to learn those lessons very much. But we know of certain people. I guess we all know of people that have really had, like you. I think you were saying the other day that a major cause of bankruptcy is actually medical care.
Yeah, I believe that's true, Dr. Larry, that even among individuals who have health insurance, I believe that the most common cause of bankruptcy is health care expenditures.
And that goes against nature. You know, that's wrong.
It's fundamentally unfair.
It's immoral. It's and yet we've got a system that requires or that causes that. So is there any activity among your fellow physicians to try to bring some of these issues to the attention of I guess you'd have to say the political establishment?
Yes, and I think one of the most vocal proponents of reform is a good friend and colleague of mine here in Minnesota. His name is Dr. Kumar, Dr. R. Kumar, Kumar, and he's been a vocal proponent of some sort of parity in the cost of medicines, especially in the area of leukemia and hematology and cancer, where a month of treatment might run $10,000 or $15,000, and oftentimes we cannot determine upfront what proportion of that bill will be picked up by insurance companies.
And it's more than one month too, right?
Oh yes. So you may only live a short number of months, and even if you can afford the medicine, then we're faced with this existential moral dilemma. Do I bankrupt my estate and my family with a medication that may prolong my life for a limited period of time? These are difficult decisions that we never struggled with, but we certainly do every day at the bedside.
So what is he doing?
He has been a very vocal author, writing in major medical journals, and has been very articulate on Twitter with credible data explaining why we have this dilemma, whereas the same medications in other countries are only a fraction of what our patients are paying.
Are they politically active?
They are medically active, and I think our policymakers are listening that the current system is flawed, it's not sustainable, and as a country we can do better.
Is that the most? I guess that's the most prominent person that you were familiar with.
Yes, but I do think that the medical student of today has a far more robust social conscience than perhaps students of a generation or so ago.
Yeah, that's
and a lot
generally
of their
true.
And a lot of their training focuses on community engagement, the power of relationships, the power of culture. So I think we will see a wave of politically oriented, savvy medical students who are not satisfied with the current predicament.
Well, right now, as you know, from this, I'm putting on my political hat again. Right now is a very opportune time for a serious and non-socialistic series of proposal for adoption particularly by the Republicans, although not all the Democrats are in favor of socialized medicine either. But that's the reason I resurrected this article of mine, because if we could make some kind of impact right now on proper people, we might be able to get some action.
Well, Dr. Larry, I think your thinking is right on the money, because we're in a very volatile time with the run-up to the 2020 election, and I think now is the time for voices to be heard to somehow make this system work for patients and families.
You've been listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network.
If you want to hear another view of the latest developments in Trump's Washington, listen to the Dr. Larry Show. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Larry is a former businessman, entrepreneur, college president, and author who provides background and context for current events and trends in politics, education, foreign policy, and religion from a conservative perspective. Tune in and hear the other side as Dr. Larry talks with Washington insiders exclusively on blogtalkradio.com and the podcast at thebachelorpadnetwork.com.
Well, you're actually listening to the Dr. Larry Show. We always like to get that plug in. We didn't quite expect that right then, but I'll take whatever I can get. So we were talking about the possible political intervention of some key medical spokespeople. How would we go about getting some? If we could get some exposure to some of our ideas. My own contacts with the medical profession are a little bit outdated now. A lot of the people I knew back in the day have either retired or gone on to their eternal rest.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering if there's some practical action that we could take that would be productive. Do you have any ideas along those lines?
The three major medical organizations have been profoundly touched by these economic issues, and I'm thinking of the AMA, the American Medical Association, an organization called ASCO, ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Another organization is called ASH, ASH, the American Society of Hematology. And the leadership of each of these organizations is acutely aware of the need to engage the political process, because the voice of only one group, namely the medical group, will get drowned out in a sea of controversy. So the leadership of these organizations, as well as other medical forums, clearly understands that we as a profession cannot do this alone, but we need the partnership with the other key stakeholders in this journey.
Are you familiar personally with the leadership in any of these organizations?
No, I am not, Dr. Larry, but I do know from position papers and from medical publications, each of them understands, since they're dealing with patients and their lives, the need to ratchet up the discourse so that the voice of the patient and the family is clearly heard in the tabernacles of decision.
Well, maybe we could start, if you could, I just feel like the time, this is a very pregnant time for trying to come up with some relatively radical concept in this field, and I feel I'm very pleased that you were willing to share this with me tonight, because I think we have to somehow join forces and start trying to get some of these ideas floating around in some of the circles that eventually will have the decisions as to what kind of programs are going to be ultimately adopted.
Yes. Dr. Larry, I have a brilliant article here in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and this was dated Sunday, August 11th, by Mr. D.J. Tice, T-I-C-E. And the title of the article is Beware Side Effects of Healthcare Policy. And he eloquently outlines how complicated these issues are, how no one voice can make all the difference, and the key stakeholders need to meet around the table in a collaborative, compassionate manner to somehow help the patients and the families during the darkest days of their lives.
Can you send me the URL of that, or?
Yes, I can do that. This is the Sunday Star-Tribune, August 11th, a few days ago. Beware Side Effects of Healthcare Policy by Mr. Tyson. I can send you the link on this, Dr. Larry.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I spent quite a bit of time in Minneapolis when I was with Control Data.
Yes. It's a wonderful city, a wonderful spirit, a wonderful culture, and I'm just privileged to be part of this Minnesota experiment.
Well, Minnesota's also gotten pretty liberal in the last several years.
I'm gently smiling, but I think historically the mantra has been to take care of the orphan and the widow.
Well, I guess you had your wrestler governor was interesting.
Yes, I'm smiling, and I remember a bitterly cold morning when I turned on the radio, and I was enlightened that we had a new governor. As I remember, it was about 30 below zero. It was like living in Siberia. I was looking for the yaks in the driveway, and there it was. He won.
I doubt if he could have won anyplace else.
I think you're right, Dr. Larry. I'm quietly smiling because I've never had chest pain in my life, but I think I did that morning.
Well, I remember those cold mornings. I used to have to go to Minneapolis once a week, and
yes.
We always had to take in those days I had a cigarette lighter, and I used to use it for the key to my car, because if I usually the car had to stay outdoors all night.
Yes.
and you'd have to warm up your key to get it into the slot so you could unlock the car.
Yes.
It was.
And I might add, there's a caring, compassionate culture in the upper Midwest. There's a genuine desire to do the right thing, to help your neighbor, because we all do well if we all do well.
Where did you grow up originally?
Well, I'm smiling because it was a bizarre childhood. I grew up primarily on the racetracks of the East Coast. My father was a bookmaker, a handicapper, and a jockey's agent.
So you naturally became a physician, right?
Yes. And his advice to me, he used to call me Skipper. He said, Skipper, never bet on anything that eats. So I've tried to follow. He also said, never invest in anything that needs to be repainted, especially a boat.
Well, that all explains why you became a physician.
Yes, but despite the issues and the challenges, it's a sacred calling, and there is no profession where we have an intimate snapshot of the soul of that suffering human being.
Well, I guess you might share that with a minister, wouldn't you?
Yes, and I once made the comment, I was not smart enough to get into divinity school, so I went into medical school.
Well, if you had gotten into ministry school, you probably wouldn't have prospered as well.
I've been very blessed.
And you wouldn't have had to work as hard.
I think you're right. Thank you.
Well, it's been a very delightful hour, and let's keep in touch here because I think we maybe we can trade perspectives a little bit and get something going maybe.
Yes, and I think if we can gently move the needle, I think we will have done a service to our suffering brothers and sisters.
Well, it's such a profound, as you point out, it's a profound issue. It's essentially life and death.
Absolutely.
And we need to. I mean, frankly, the accusations of our friend Bernie are actually true to this, to the extent that there's no excuse for the kind of neglect that our really very wealthy society, the wealthiest probably in the history of the world, that doesn't seem to care for the homeless and the sick. But in this case, we're not just talking about the people on the fringes of society. We're talking about the people who make up the society, all of them.
Yeah, we're talking about you and me and our listeners and their families, right?
Exactly, and for us to have a medical system that is so corrupt and so it just doesn't there just doesn't seem to be. It's like trying to control an octopus or something. It's simply got so many tentacles out in so many different areas that it's very, very difficult to get your mind around. And I know that what I've done is not all that professional or all that profound, but I figure that you can curse the darkness or you can light one candle.
Yes, and you're lighting a candle with the power of communication, and for that we owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude and appreciation, Dr. Larry.
Well, I really appreciate that. I also want to thank you, Dr. Ed Creagan, That's like Reagan with a G, right?
I often say that to individuals. It's like Reagan with a C, and obviously everybody remembers the great communicator.
Yeah. Well, we want. I want to thank you for spending this time with us, and it's been a informative and delightful hour, and I look forward to. I look forward to maintaining our contact here. But before we do, is there some? How do people get a hold of you, or what? Have you got any recent books or articles
Sure.
or something
you want to mention our book Farewell, about end of life. Another book
yes.
that is a bestseller on Amazon is called How Not to Be My Patient. How Not to Be My Patient. And I have a footprint on Twitter, and it's at Edward Creagan, Creagan. And one of our websites is www.askdoctor.ed.com. So all of those options are available. And we're all in the same bucket, Dr. Larry.
Well, I enjoy being in the bucket with you.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
We just want to have a bucket list, do we?
Right. Good point.
Well, tonight we have been talking about free market healthcare system, what it might look like. Our guest has been Dr. Edward Creagan, and I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa. You can follow me on the BachelorNewsRadioNetwork.com, on my website, drlarryonline.com, DR for doctor, and also on YouTube this is under Lawrence Fedewa, and those were put on before I got on the radio and had to simplify my name. So we want to say good night and God bless everybody. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show, and we're signing off.
Thank you, Dr. Larry.